Major technology firms are facing increased scrutiny in many parts of the world. The legal action against Facebook in the US is just the latest in a string of cases looking at how these digital giants could be abusing their dominant position online. Well, for more, let's speak now with our business editor, Stephen Carroll. Stephen, these cases against Facebook very much fit into a pattern, don't they? What other legal cases are big technology companies facing at the moment?
Well, the Federal Trade Commission is the US government's competition law watchdog. So its missions are to protect consumer behaviour and also to limit deceptive or unfair practices based on a company acting in an anti-competitive way. Most of the cases that the FTC has taken in the past have been focused on consumer protection rather than necessarily monopolistic behaviour. If we look back at some of the recent cases they've had in relation to technology, in 2019 the FTC fined YouTube $170 million, and that was over children's privacy and access to children's videos on the platform. In 2019 as well, Facebook was fined $5 billion, a record fine for the FTC, and that was in relation to the Cambridge Analytica scandal. So again, privacy issues and consumer protection there as well. If the FTC had approved the Facebook's acquisition of WhatsApp and Instagram between 2012 and 2014, and that really goes to the heart of what this case is about. And if we go back even further, the FTC also investigated Google's dominance in the search engine sector, that as far back as 2013, and in that case they got Google to commit to certain changes in how it operates its search engine, although that decision has been criticised for not seeking stronger protections or stronger commitments from Google in that sense. So what's different about this case is that it's the focus on the monopolistic behaviour, but also the fact that it's actually the FTC is taking this to court and letting the courts investigate this, and the remedies they're seeking aren't in terms of fines, they're in terms of action from the company to try and end this anti-competitive behaviour, this attempt in the FTC's eyes by Facebook to try and hoover up the competition rather than compete in free markets, which they should be doing. That's of course the FTC's point of view. They're looking for remedies up to forcing Facebook to sell off WhatsApp and Instagram. So it's a very different case from those previous ones for those reasons. It also, Facebook for its part, of course, pointing to the fact that the FTC did approve the acquisitions of both WhatsApp and Instagram in the past. Of course, the situation is very different now in the social media world than it was back in those kind of 6 to 8 years ago when those acquisitions were made. That's something now the courts will have to examine in the United States to see if the courts find that there is anti-competitive behaviour on the part of Facebook.
And Stephen, there are also reports today that the EU could soon be beefing up its powers in relation to these companies. What more can you tell us with that?
This is a report from the Financial Times, which is linked to a broader overhaul of the European Union's new Digital Services Act, which will be overhauling all of the rules around internet giants in the EU. And what the FT is reporting today is that under these draft regulations set to be published next week, is that there will be more emphasis put on these companies themselves policing certain elements of the internet, including things like requiring companies that operate marketplaces like Amazon, requiring them to vet sellers before they're placed on their platforms. That'd be third-party companies that use the Amazon platform to sell their goods. I'm just using Amazon as an example there. According to these draft regulations, there would also be a requirement for these companies to share data with regulators on how they're policing illegal content on their platforms, and also a requirement for greater transparency around advertising to clearly mark what is advertising on these digital platforms. This would apply to digital companies that serve more than 45 million EU users, 10% of the EU's population. And if these companies would be found in breach of these requirements, they could be fined up to 6% of their global turnover, which would be, of course, billions and billions of euros in the case of the biggest technology companies. This, as part of a wider overhaul of the EU rules, which are seen as being drastically in need of updating to cope with what is, of course, a world very different from when the original EU competition rules, which is how most of the previous EU investigations have been centred on, that is something that the EU is now seeking to update with these new regulations.
And Stephen, turning finally to the markets, has that dinner between Ursula von der Leyen and Boris Johnson been making any impact?
There has been some movement on the currency markets. The currency markets is usually where we see events relating to Brexit playing out in terms of market moves. So sterling a little bit weaker today against the dollar and the euro, down about 0.5% in both cases. Not a dramatic move, and that does, I suppose, reflect the fact that we didn't get any dramatic movements out of that meeting in Brussels either, with the two leaders pushing back the deadline, as it now appears to be, to the end of this weekend. But markets will be watching very closely to see, because of course if we end up either with a deal or without one, that's going to be something that we should expect to see major market reaction to when we eventually find that out. Of course, on the stock markets today in Asia, most Asian markets trading down. Just the Shanghai Composite trading slightly in positive territory. The Nikkei in Tokyo down by around 1/5%.
Stephen Carroll, our business editor, thank you very much.